Yeah, this is the team that blew a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets after dancing midway through the third quarter. After Marcus Morris said he was ready to get home, it was a pretty comical series of events that led up to a catastrophic collapse. Let's give credit to Denver as well because they were fantastic and proved they could match it against the Lakers, the eventual champions. But no one really cares what Denver did in terms of the Clippers because when we talk about the Clippers, their expectations were to win a championship and they fell short, not just short, they fell miles short of it and embarrassingly short in the way they exited the playoffs. Not to mention, this is made even worse when the opposite side of LA not only won the championship and has the biggest fan base in the sport, and we're probably going to clown the Clippers regardless of how they finished the season. So for them to finish the season like that, yeah, the Clippers pretty much have a chance to redeem themselves next year, and until they win a championship, they're going to be remembered for blowing a 3-1 lead before they got a chance to face the Lakers after promising so much during the regular season and the off-season. Now, quickly before I get into the video, if you could drop a like right now, that would be much appreciated. Helps out the videos a lot, and cheers. Now, I've seen some people proposing crazy trades, but the reality is there's just not going to be a huge change to this roster, and I don't think there needs to be. This team is far from perfect, but they're still a very good team. Kawhi's a top 5 player in the league. PG kind of got his rhythm back towards the end of the Nuggets series after being, well, not game 7 obviously, but after being terrible against Dallas. He was pretty good against the Nuggets, and he's just an inconsistent playoff performer it seems, but still a top 15 player in the league, I'd say. And then you have the other guys that are going to come back like Beverly, Williams, Zubac, Shamet, and whoever else they managed to sign, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the team's still pretty good. I mean, they need a few changes, and the team's not as good as it looked heading into the season. Looking back at it in hindsight, there's quite a few weaknesses that got exposed by Denver in particular, but it's still a strong team that should be able to compete next year, particularly if they just make a few changes, which they're going to have to make because this is a year where it's championship or bust. In terms of players that are going to be out of contract, there's a few, but the most notable ones are Morris, Green, and Harrell. I'm almost certain Harrell's going to leave. LA won't have the money to offer him, and by all reports, he's not too happy there, particularly at the end of the season, with numerous reports about him and others just not being happy with what Paul George was saying and how he was being treated, considering how disappointing he was performing. Although I don't know how Harrell really has room to talk because he was incredibly bad, particularly someone who promised so much after winning 6th Man of the Year. But anyways, in terms of Morris and Green, they're pretty crucial for the Clippers to keep. I think they're more important than Harrell. Morris was good defending a few different positions, knocks down his shots. Green was actually surprisingly good defending Jokic, one of the few guys that could do so. Not effectively, but like semi-effectively, I'd say. And although these guys have a pretty strong market value, I think the Clippers might be able to keep both of them, hopefully, hoping for their sakes. Morris would probably be looking in the 10 to 15 region, and Green probably the 4 to 8 region. I don't know how that balances up on the books, but based off how they were last year, that would probably be around the mark. In my opinion, there's 2 positions of need for the Clippers. It's the center position and the point guard position. Jokic absolutely dominated them in the playoffs. I mean, he dominated most teams, but the Clippers were just, they had no answer. And I don't know how Zubac didn't play more minutes. Maybe that's got to do with Doc Rivers, even though he was the only one kind of capable of slowing him down, and Green, like I mentioned. But they still need a better center. They need someone that can stretch the floor. Maybe that would be ideal. Or just someone that has more of an inside presence. Because bringing back Joakim Noah, JaMychal Green, and Zubac, yeah, that's not enough to win a championship regardless of who you have on the perimeter. In terms of the options they have on the market, they're going to be looking for someone cheap, as you'd expect. Howard and McGee, the 2 Lakers guys, would actually be solid options. And we've seen McGee doesn't mind hopping over teams to chase a ring. And then the top option, who I think is the top option for a number of teams, is Aaron Baines, who's just a huge pickup for any contender. He just adds depth. He can play the 4 and the 5. They'd probably just have him at the 5. He can stretch the floor. He can defend inside. He's played on multiple good teams, so he knows what it's like to win. And he's just the kind of guy you could see seamlessly fitting in and making an impact for a team that desperately needs some presence at the center spot. And the other position of need is the point guard spot. I don't know what happened to Lou Will. He was absolutely terrible. He shot 4 for 27 from 3. He shot over 50% from the field in one game against the Nuggets. In a 7-game series, 4 of 27 from 3, and shot over 50% once. And I just don't know if you can trust him anymore. He wasn't a great playoff performer leading into this. He had a good series against the Warriors last year, but this year he was just awful, and they're going to need some more presence at the point guard position because I don't think Lou Will and Pat Bev just provide enough. As the thumbnail shows, I believe Derrick would be a good option as someone who watched most of the Pistons games. Rose was amazing. His floater and mid-range game was exceptional. He was getting to the rim like you would expect from the great man himself. And not only was he getting to the rim and scoring, he was actually getting to the rim and kicking out. That's something that a lot of people don't recognize. They think he's just a scorer, but he was averaging like 5 to 6 assists a game and is genuinely playmaking for the team. He was the lead playmaker, only playing about 26 to 28 minutes a game off the bench. I don't know if that's because of injury concerns, because Casey had something else in mind, but I'd expect him to play similar minutes alongside Lou Will and Pat Bev. He won't be asked to do as much as he was in Detroit, but what he can do is just what the Clippers need. That's someone who can create for themselves and create for others, because they just don't have enough of them, particularly at the guard position. When Lou Will's not getting his shots to fall, Landry Shamet and Pat Bev, and then whoever else they have, it's just not enough against teams like the Nuggets and the Mavericks who they faced, who have primary creators at the guard position. I mean, LA is going to have to give up something to get him from Detroit, particularly on such a friendly contract, and that's why he might not be their first option, because I'm sure they'll try to inquire and get someone through free agency. Another great option would be Goran Dragic. Dragic is a bit of a reach because he's going to get his money, and he could get his money on the Heat, a contender, a team he likes. Doesn't really make too much sense for him to go to a team that performed worse to get less money probably, so I doubt that would happen, but that's an option. Maybe Rajon Rondo would be a great option as well. Maybe he switches sides. It would be a Rondo thing to do. But for financial reasons and just for reasons of being the best player out of all the guys I've mentioned, D Rose would be the best option. He's shown time in and time out, particularly on the Pistons, he made about 4 or 5 clutch shots, game-winning shots, maybe 3 or 4 game-winning shots. And that's the kind of guy they needed, because during the Nuggets series, they had that many chances to put the game to bed, but they were blowing layups, they were hitting the side of the backboard. And I can just imagine him being injected into the game and getting to the rim and just getting a basket when they need it to stop the bleeding, which they just never managed to stop throughout a 4-game turnaround. But it won't come cheap. They're probably going to have to give up one of their young players to the Pistons, maybe a Landry Shamet. It's a championship or bust year. There's no other way to put it. They need to bring in whoever they can to help them win. Next year, Kawhi and PG are free agents. They have no draft picks. They don't really have any future talent on the roster except Zubac, Shamet, and like Terrence Mann. But that's not enough to the point where you can build around, particularly if you lose your star players. So they're just going to have to give up whatever they need. Landry Shamet, a second round pick, whatever they can piece together to bring in D Rose. I think it would be worthwhile because this is a championship or bust kind of year. Everyone has been really harsh on the Clippers, and it's kind of funny to look at it, but there was reports this team felt no chemistry. Maybe off the court, on the court, it certainly wasn't, and it doesn't help when you have your 2 best players not familiar with everyone's strengths and weaknesses on the roster. I mean, even LeBron didn't make the playoffs last year. You could probably look through countless examples of teams being changed drastically and not being at their best in the first year of playing, because it's just not an ideal situation to change a game plan around 2 players and that don't really know the environment or the teammates as well as you'd like. And maybe the Clippers think the way to rebuild that chemistry, build on that chemistry, is hiring a new coach. And there's been a couple of candidates, Darvin Ham and Wes Unseld Jr. Now, I'd be lying to you if I told you I knew all about these guys, but I do know Wes Unseld has been credited for some of the development of those younger Nuggets players and also their improvement on the defensive end of the floor. You just can't really argue with someone who's been around a Denver team that have had so much success and seen so much improvement defensively and just overall as a team, so I'm all for him getting the job. Again, I don't really know about their strengths and weaknesses to a T, but he seems like a solid option. When you have your 2 best players who will be free agents next year, there's no guarantee they're going to sign back for the Clippers. They're probably unlikely to if it ends up like it did this year. And then you have no future young players, you have no future picks. You really just don't have anything going for you for the future. You're going to have to win now, and that's why I think they bring in Derrick Rose. They try to re-sign Marcus Morris, JaMychal Green, and a center, Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, Aaron Baines, someone of that mold, an experienced veteran center who they can get relatively cheap, that can make an impact. And they run it back. It's that simple. They're going to have to. They're going to bring in a new coach. Maybe Wes Unseld Jr. is the solution. Maybe he's the next coach that comes in and wins something in his first year, like a Steve Kerr. But not only are they going to have external development, external influence, they're going to have internal development, particularly PG. He was a top 10 player in the league last year comfortably. Kawhi's still going to be a top 5 player. He was during the playoffs, but PG was awful during the playoffs. He was probably top 20, which is a big drop off when you have teams like the Lakers who have 2 guaranteed top 5 players. They're going to be guaranteed top 5 players next year. You're going to need PG to deliver. There's just too much talent for PG to be a top 25 player in the league and them to expect to win when they don't have the surrounding pieces. That means he can just fit in and be a role player. He's got to be a star, and that's what they're paying him to be. I don't have the Clippers as the top team in the West. I'd say the Lakers, obviously, and then I'd have the Warriors, and then probably the Clippers tied with the Nuggets. There's so much talent. You could even throw Dallas into that mix. Utah, Houston, like, I'm probably missing someone. The Pelicans are going to improve. Like, there's just a number of teams that are going to be good next year. But again, if they can get a solid center, they can re-sign their guys that they need to re-sign. They can get a good head coach and trade for a point guard or bring in a point guard through free agency. They're still going to be a contender. See, they've got two great players, particularly Kawhi and PG. I think he'll bounce back. I don't know. If you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Really helps out how the content does. And if you've made it all the way to the end of the video and haven't subscribed, yeah, I don't know what you're doing. Anyways, I'll catch you next time. Bye.